can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate all of you following the signs that said, please observe silence. It's not easy for people to follow anything these days, so I appreciate that. You know, one of the things I learned early on in kind of Buddhist temple, monastery life is when I started going to the temple. This is 2003. I was depressed. Anyone here depressed? Only two of you? Then I don't know why the rest of you are here. I was angry. You know, I didn't like myself. I didn't like things. And so I went, discovered this Buddhist practice, and I thought, well, this thing is going to answer all my problems, you know, solve all my problems, answer all my questions, and, you know, take away my anger and depression and all that kind of stuff. And I showed up at this temple. I had no questions for them. They didn't have any answers. It didn't become therapy. It wasn't psychology. It wasn't what's going on in the world that's causing all my madness. It was, here, go sweep. Here, go clean the bathroom. Here, go hang something on the walls. When we bow, you bow. When we chant, you chant. When we have time for restroom break, you go to the restroom. I mean, if you need to pee, go pee. But we just followed. And there was an awareness of everything that was in the temple. And I was taught super early on that the temple is your mind. That's how I was trained. And so you learn to take care of it as if it's the most important thing in the world. When we would sweep, the master would always say, sweep the leaves as if that's your mind. And every single day you must sweep. Because if there's a lot of leaves one day and they pile up, and you don't sweep them the next day, more leaves. And so the sweeping was a meditative practice as a reminder to train the mind to come present every single day, to clear or deal with or observe or clean, whatever words you want to use, all the leaves that are in your head, which is the emotions, the madness, the sadness, the anger, the depression, whatever all that was. Take care of it every day. And so for me, that practice has never changed. It's definitely been a struggle and a balance and a challenge, kind of mirroring that in lay Western life. You know, not a monk, so my life is not that. But little things about entering the temple where you immediately no longer think about yourself. How many of you came here today because you want to make sure somebody else is cared for and okay? 1, 2. And you're how old? How old? 7. The 7-year-old is here because he wants to make sure other people are okay, right? This is what this practice is about. Thank you for showing Marcus, right? Thanks, Marcus. Right? It's about others. Where I'm going with this one little example is when we're done here, if your shoes are not where you put them, we didn't sell them, they haven't been taken by somebody walking by who thought your shoes were nicer. They've just been put in the actual shoe rack. I know that's an odd thing to do, which is to actually put shoes in a shoe rack and in front of a shoe rack or, things like that. Why would we put shoes in a shoe rack? Whose shoes are they? They're yours. But who could trip over them? Anybody. Any walker, any wheelchair, anything could fall. But we just think my shoes, put them down, take them off, go sit down. That's what we think about. Because we're here thinking about ourselves. Every single thing in a temple is an opportunity. A lot of Zen temples, Zen practice centers, they have signs everywhere. And you don't speak. You're just silent. And you follow. And when you don't speak, you know what you can't do? Talk, yes. What do we spend a lot of our time doing all day long? Thinking, and what does thinking become? There's one word specifically I'm looking for. Complaining. Thank you very much. When you can't speak, you can't complain. That's rule number one, which is really just like, oh my God, I'm in this place all day long and I'm silent, so I just spent the whole day not complaining. That was new to me. The idea of not complaining. Like, just try that one day. I mean, try it for like an hour first, See, can we go through the day and not complain? But this idea of just following signs and people, now obviously if they jump off a cliff, that's the time to stop following them. But when you follow them and you just observe the guidelines and the structure, it takes it away from what? Self. And what does the Buddha teach that all of our suffering comes from? Self. So we're here, right? I get it. That's why I started with what got me into Buddhism. I'm not knocking people. You're not like a bad person or a bad Buddhist if those were your shoes not in the shoe rack. Don't spend the next hour feeling guilty for the 3 people whose shoes got put away. I'm getting nicer in my old age because what I used to do is I would take the pair of shoes and I would take one and put it over here and one like all the way over here just to really mess with people. But, I'm getting old. But keep in mind that every action that we take, there is the law of cause and effect. And this is karma. Karma is not what goes around comes around. Karma is not getting what we deserve. Karma is action, the law of cause and effect. So in temple spaces, begin to treat that as if that is your mind. Now that is the problem right there. Because how do most of us treat our minds? Not so well. How do we talk to ourselves? Not so well. What types of things do we think all day long? Not so pleasant. I get it. I'm there. I've been there. I will be there. That's why this is called a practice. This is not me having figured all this shit out and lecturing you that I get it and you don't. This is me observing, after all these years, how difficult this practice is. It's honestly why I don't like going out there. I just like being isolated in a temple because it's an opportunity to train the mind. But use these as opportunities, especially those who've been here a long time, like, hey, notice something, right? If you pee on the seat, somebody else has to sit on that. If your shoes aren't in the thing, somebody's going to trip over that. Right? If there's a silent retreat going on, observe that. All these things are opportunities to train the mind. And when we bring this into practice, and we take it away from me, what I learned from this practice, and all I can share is what I learned, when I stopped complaining about everything in my life 20-something years ago, and I just did stuff, I felt good. It was nice to not focus on me anymore. And to actually take care of something not better than me, not greater than me, but something other than me. And I can think of no better way than to introduce truly the heart of Buddhist teachings, which is to go beyond the sense of self. Than to just make the things you do not about you anymore. And if they're not about you anymore, as the Buddha said, then who is suffering? Where does suffering exist? Where do you find it? It exists in one place and one place only. And that is the mind. And when we don't focus on ourselves, that's an opportunity to enjoy what we're doing. And so since, we don't live in temples and we don't spend our life in Buddhist monasteries, I encourage you all to bring this practice into wherever you live. If you can't bring it into your entire house, bring it into your room if you have a room. If you can't bring it into the entire room, bring it into a bathroom or a closet. But begin to treat some area as a sacred space. Last thing I'll say, in Shinto practice, and I've never studied Shinto, I know very little bit about it, but I'm sure many of you have seen them. They're called torii gates. There's these really cool, massive gates. You'll see them in Japan. They look like that. But they're called torii gates. And the idea is that when you enter the gate, you're leaving kind of the mundane world outside and you're entering into the spiritual space. And so for me as a practice, I try to observe that as you leave one space and enter another. Can you treat something in your life as sacred? Because it is just a reflection of your mind. Right? So just, again, reminders for those who are always here to stop and think about like, hey, am I actually taking care of the space and making sure it's safe and clean and healthy for those around me? And for those who are here for the first time, I always say, I still think this is the best thing to learn. Right? I'm sure all of you didn't show up here to be lectured about where to put your shoes and how to pee, but I still think that that is the essence of this practice. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Anna?
Oh, I took the last paper towel, so I'm actually not going to be able to meditate if I don't go get the paper towels, so I'm leaving my shop. I'll be right back.
Thank you. We will keep an eye on Marcus. Thanks, Anna. And the beauty of this is Anna and a handful of others actually know where the paper towels are. I gave that advanced teaching many months ago, so you'll have to go back for that one. All right, so we'll start with the meditation practice, since that's why most of you showed up here anyways. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. I mean, you don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. This practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. It helps if you're on a cushion, slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward, allows the back to straighten. If you're on a bench or chair, also just trying to sit up straight however you're seated, trying to be comfortable. And to those joining virtually, welcome. I'm sure you're all now cleaning your closets. Thanks for showing up. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important with this practice, do not expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice. Observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice, just sitting, breathing. Where's your mind? Lost in thought? Return to breath. Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. With the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds. And the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, it's nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. Meditation, Buddhist practice, is direct perception into the present moment. And very often, as we know, the present moment is filled with conflict, chaos, difficulties, challenges. So this is learning to be with life as it arises. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, meditation doesn't fix that. It helps you become aware of your life that's a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess so you can then actually make changes in your life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, becoming aware of everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do. And how everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do impacts those around you. That is the practice, and that never changes. It doesn't necessarily get easier. Often it actually gets more challenging, it gets more difficult. When you begin to actually become mindful and aware of your thoughts and your words and your actions and how they impact others, man, that's rough. It can be really annoying too. When you actually try to take accountability for your thoughts and words and actions and you try to become aware of how they affect others, it's so much easier to just be selfish and not think about anybody else. But that's not what this practice is. This practice is helping you wake up to your own madness. It's not about Buddhism, it's not about meditation, it's not about any religion, it's not about anything. It's about you. Buddhist practice is a mirror, and it's an opportunity to reflect back on your actions throughout your day. And as I said earlier, that never changes. But that's why we call it a practice. Not to judge yourself by it, not to read some gentle Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron book and then compare yourself to them and think you're a bad Buddhist. You know? Or hopefully not punish yourself if you were one of the 3 people whose shoes weren't in the shoe rack. You're allowed to come back, it's just fine. Please get rid of that guilt or shame that you might feel. This is life. Life is filled with opportunities to be aware. And so for me, the joy is creating spaces that provide the opportunity for us to become aware. Because when we're done here and you go out into that world didn't just finish their meditation. They don't care how quiet and calm and peaceful you are. The moment you get back on that freeway, wherever you're going, they will run you over and not even think twice. So the question is, how do you respond in that environment? That's why we practice here. Or anywhere you practice, really. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I always really prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. And again, to those joining virtually, thanks for being here. Feel free, as you are, to say hello. If you have any questions, put them on the chat box, and I'll do my best to respond. So we'll open up to questions.
I know all we have is breath to breath, but we must prepare for the future. Simple things like if you're almost empty on your gas and you just say, well, just keep driving, you got to prepare. You got to get gas. You got to get rent. So there is a time when you have to think of the future.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, shine it on.
Sure. No, great question. But let me clarify a couple things for you. You don't have to get gas. You said if the gas is on empty, you have to get gas. No, you don't. Do you?
You can walk. If you're on the freeway, you're in trouble, but go ahead.
Okay. Why do you want to get gas?
So I can propel myself in my car to get places faster.
Okay. And why do you want to get places faster?
So I can accomplish more.
So you can accomplish more. Why do you want to accomplish more?
Because that's the way I've been taught.
It's the way you've been taught. And that feeds your what?
Ego.
Ego. And what causes so much of our suffering?
Our ego.
Our ego. Now, the moral of the story is not to run out of gas, for those who are maybe new. Right? People show up here the first time and then they're like, I went to this Buddhist place and they told me to run out of gas. Right? The idea is to understand, and I get the nature of your question and I'll come back to that, but the idea is to understand that every desire and craving we have, there's an intention behind it. And the Buddha taught that there are healthy cravings, healthy desires. Right? The desire to suffer less, healthy. If we didn't want to suffer less, none of us would be here. If we wanted to continue to be miserably sad and angry and depressed and anxious and stressed and whatever our whole lives, none of us would explore meditation or any sort of spiritual practice. But there's that desire to be healthier and happier and kinder and better in our lives. Right? Continue that desire. There's nothing wrong with having gas and having a vehicle to get places. The question is, and this is a metaphor as well, where are we trying to go and why? That's the question. So there's nothing wrong, back to your direct question, the practice of staying present and with the breath doesn't mean that the future isn't coming. It will. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't prepare or have some plan in place for the future. We should. That would be wise. Or you would starve to death. You would, a lot of things would happen. But the question is, one, what's the intention behind the planning and preparation, whatever it might be? Two, you ever plan for something that didn't work out the way you planned it?
Yes.
Yeah? Pretty certain, since we're all here, myself included, it's Saturday at 11 o'clock, some things in our lives have not gone how we planned. That's just what happens. And how do we respond when things don't work out how we planned? You ever plan something and had it work actually better? So we can prepare and plan all we want. But the practice, as the Buddha taught of non-attachment, is to not attach to that outcome. And sometimes things turn out better. Sometimes things turn out worse. We don't know. And always, even just coming back to the gas example, since you mentioned freeway, things like that, safety, of course, is always important. Again, for those who are new to Buddhism, this is not like, I'm just going to breathe and let life happen and allow people to be beaten and abused and tortured. And no, keep yourself and the life of those around you as safe as possible in any way you can. There's a lot of compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom in that. So it's not about just kind of being oblivious to the pain and suffering in the world. I mean, that's ultimately the Bodhisattva practice. Bodhisattva means enlightened being. The Bodhisattva practice is to be reborn, life after vow, I should say, is to be reborn. And if you're not into rebirth, don't even worry about it. Just think about waking up each day, right? But to be reborn or waking up each day, life after life, endlessly, to liberate all sentient beings from suffering. That is the Bodhisattva vow. Dalai Lama, they say, is the literal rebirth of Kuan Yin. She's the large statue in the middle behind me here. Her name means hear of the world's cries. So she hears all the suffering in the world and pours out compassion to heal. And the vow was to return endlessly, time and time again, to help all beings who are suffering. So with that in mind also, often we need gas so you can get places to help people suffer less. Yeah.
During the meditation practice, you kept mentioning to notice your thoughts and come back to the breath. And when you talk about meditation, you also talk about it as a point of of reflection and thinking about your day and your life and like who you are. And I'm wondering like how do you reconcile focusing on the breath and like being in this like meditative state of almost like, I don't know, blankness versus reflecting on your day and taking that time to be with those thoughts.
Yeah.
Like what are we aiming for in this meditative practice?
Man, if I could answer that, I'd be golden, you know? The practice to kind of bring the balance of the two together is to, first and foremost, and I always introduce it this way, especially for those who might be new to meditation, that there's this idea that something is supposed to happen, for many people who might be new, that something is supposed to happen. Or that we're supposed to, that's why I say nothing's going to happen, you're not going to float away, you're not going to have any mystical, magical experience, you're not going to figure anything out, the mind will not shut off, you will not think nothing. Very often people come into meditation and think that they're going to go blank, as you say, really. And they're not going to go blank. The mind is going to continue to race. Always. There's one time and one time only, potentially, that the mind shuts off, and that's when? Death. And hopefully we make it through this alive, or it's just going to be a lot of trouble for the rest of us. So please keep it simple for us. The idea with meditation, and then I'll get to the second part of your question about figuring things out. As an example, what I'm doing in this practice, thought arises, right? Or breath in, breath out. My attention and intention is to focus on sensation of breath. So thought arises, breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out, thought arises. Hunger. Recognize the thought, release it, come back to the breath. Breath in, breath out. 2 seconds later, next thought again. Hunger again. This is what I want to do. Release that thought, come back to the breath. What I don't want to do, thought arises, I'm hungry. What do I want to eat? I want a burrito. I'm going to go to Pokies. I want chips, I want sauce, I'd like more water. Next thing you know, from one single thought of hunger, I'm sitting there for 5 minutes thinking about a burrito. And now I'm probably hungrier than I was 5 minutes ago. Now, why is this important? You ever been angry about something in your life for 5 minutes or 5 years? You know, you're younger, so I said 5 years. You know, if I'd said 30, you would have tapped out a long time ago. But a lot of people in this room have been angry for 30 years, 50 years. Right? No knock on the people in this room. We've carried a lot of anger with us. Something that happened to you 5 years ago that you're still angry about, when did that happen? 5 years ago. So why spend so much time thinking about it? So what we're doing is training the mind to be present. I'm not suggesting let it go and pretend it didn't happen. Whatever happened in your past happened in your past, and it was painful, and it was traumatic, and that existed. And to be able to choose to look at it when we want to in a healthy way is important, so we can learn from mistakes, don't repeat the same things, keep ourselves safe, whatever it might be. So I'm not suggesting to ignore the past, but having the ability, when you sit and kind of get stuck on something from the past, and you just find yourself in like a 3-hour or 3-week depression, that's all coming from one single thought and our inability to stay present. Does that make sense? So if you focus on a breath, if you focus on a bottle of water, if you focus on a shoe, if you focus on whatever, one thing, what are you not focused on? Everything else. And when you focus on everything else, how does that tend to make you feel? Bad, stressed out, anxious, anger, sadness, depression in the past, stress, anxiety, fear, worries in the future. So the practice is to stay present. Okay? That addresses really the first part of your question about using sensation of breath and staying with sensation of breath. The second part, which is really about where I always say meditation and Buddhist practice, I'm guessing this is where you got it from, is not going to fix anything. It helps you become aware of things so your life, so you can make changes in your life, is to begin to recognize that when we sit quietly for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when you sit quietly for 5 minutes or 20 minutes? What are you going to do? Think. Pay attention to what those thoughts are. Because those thoughts, as the Buddha taught, karma literally means action. Those thoughts then become what? Words and actions. Not necessarily in that order. But we have thoughts, then we have words, then we have actions. So when we sit and we begin to watch, they say observe the nature of the mind. You begin to see what the mind is doing. And yes, to your question, there is a balance of using meditation to sit and think and think and think versus using meditation the way I described it previously. So for me, the practice is to observe, what does the mind keep going to? Not just in seated meditation, but outside these walls, everywhere. Where does the mind fixate? What does the mind keep looking at? What does the mind keep thinking? What does the mind keep doing? Again, that's where the mirror. We become an observer of our thoughts. because we don't do things without the thoughts. The thoughts are what drive every action in our life. So if you have something in your life that is causing you so much misery, so much pain, so much sadness, use that time, take some time, I should say, to reflect on the nature of the mind that keeps going to those occurrences. And then ultimately try to find a balance of, for me, meditation is not about sitting and figuring things out. If anything, I think one way to use kind of these two examples is allow yourself time to sit with the sensation of breath. As I say, fail miserably, let the mind wander back to breath, let the mind wander back to breath. Give yourself that time to settle and kind of cool down a little bit. And then you can also take some time to sit and just think. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I want to go back to the shoes.
Someone always does. It's like my quarterly lecture, so yeah.
My question is not formulated yet.
It's all right.
Some of us are working on self-respect and just not doing the people pleasing, right? Especially as women that we've been taught to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess my question is where is the line between being respectful to others, you know, but also having our boundaries, and
For sure.
what does Buddhism teach about that?
Yeah, no, great question, and I agree. I mean, sitting here as a white, straight, able-bodied male, I've got every privilege in the book, and so anytime questions around any sort of something I can't relate to. I have no idea what it's like to be a woman who's, we live in this patriarchal society where, men just dominate everything. Right? I remember years ago, and this was at the college group, and the room was set up in this kind of like a rectangle. And we were probably like 2 years into it, and we'd get maybe 50, 60 college kids. And someone came up to me one time, and they said, hey, Jeff, do you notice who's sitting up front? This is probably 9 years ago. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, take a look. And I led it at this time. I was still leading it, so I would sit in the middle. And then, what do you think was in a line right here in this front row? All what? All dudes, all men, sitting there in this power position. And so ever since then, what I started doing, I don't lead it anymore, but I would walk up and I would move them. Go sit over there. Every single time we asked, I opened up for questions. Who do you think the first 4 questions came from? Men. White men specifically. Right? We are the worst. And I mean that very seriously. I truly feel that in my heart, and I am that. And I spent most of my life being that person. That was me for a majority of my life. 100%. So I first want to start with, I feel your question. I can't relate to it, but I feel where you're coming from as much as I can, as a dude sitting here. The second question about kind of the boundaries and things like that and in a temple, so for me, there is a balance in kind of this like following blindly and just recognizing that, the idea, using that example as you bring up, the shoes, I'm not suggesting that we put shoes in a shoe rack because I want you to abide by my rules, right? And I'm using this very personal example because I said it. Bringing it back to the Buddhist teachings, they had, at the time of the Buddha, when they built the Sangha, the community, there were 227 to 311 precepts that they were to follow. Now, these sound like rules, right? But the precepts, it's not like the Buddha sat down and said, hey, I'm going to set up a bunch of rules. As things arose in the Sangha, in the community that caused harm, it became a precept. There's what's called the Vinaya, where you could literally Google and read the Vinaya, all 227 to 311 precepts, and with them is a description as to why it's there. And they're there because these were things that caused harm. Some of them major harm, some of them minor, right? Coming back to this example, this is not about a rule because I or we as the temple want to tell you where you need to put your shoes. Why do you think I bring up putting the shoes in the shoe rack? What would be the reason for that? I mean, I kind of mentioned earlier, I just want to play this out loud. What would be the reason?
Out of respect for others, so they don't trip,
Second part, yes.
Temple, so that,
There's one word specifically I'm looking for. Safety.
yes.
So what's interesting is you actually bring this up, from the woman's perspective of wanting to feel safe. And yet that kind of, I don't know, I guess if the Buddha at the time had a shoe rack, maybe there would have been a shoe precept. I don't know, right? But the idea of the shoes is nothing about respect to me. When I hear, to me, the word respect and safety are two completely different things. To me, that's not about respecting the temple. It's not like the temple demands you put your shoes somewhere. It's about recognizing that in college, one of my favorite little poem quote things I learned was, "There follow after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building this bridge for him." And so for me, everything in the Buddhist teachings is about understanding who and what and where, this is what mindfulness is around you. And how can you create safe environments in your small kind of little world and in a global world. And so for me, one of the safest things to do, knowing that there's, look how many people in this room right now. There's 60-something people in here and 15 more downstairs. There's a ton of people. And it gets crowded. So it's just about others. It actually has nothing to do with me or the temple. So I see that as a little bit different from respecting the space. But again, even going back to the Buddhist teachings, the guidelines were there to keep things safe and healthy. And at any point in time, if people ever didn't feel comfortable with things, then you bring that up. It should arise. It should be discussed and explored. So, is that?
Yeah, it's not so much about if I don't want to put the shoes away, I don't, it's more yes, you do those things out of safety, of course, and you're courteous to others, and you're, you do the things so that everyone is safe. But then there's situations where we tend to make ourselves small, so that we're not a burden. And so I guess that's outside of the shoe situation, it's how does the Buddhist teachings see the self in terms of, this is for others, but then this is for others and taking away from me.
Yeah. So understood. And I think that the example of the shoes is really not even beginning to scratch the surface of the depth of your question, because there's so much more in, your life is not over because somebody said put your shoes in a shoe rack, right? But there are things in your life that currently and past and for many, many years and will continue to make you feel somewhat worthless, as if you're not important. And so the Buddhist teaching is very much with love and compassion. One of the things I love about prayer wheels, have you ever seen them? They're large ones in Nepal. You can turn them, they're handheld ones. But on it is a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. It means the jewel in the lotus. It's considered the great compassion mantra. And when you turn the prayer wheel, the idea is you turn it that way. So as it comes around, where does it hit first? Here. Zen Master Dogen would say you must get to know the self before you can get rid of the self. So while Buddhism talks about non-self, it doesn't mean you're not here. You are here, you are important, you matter. And this idea of people pleasing, which you mentioned, in your first question, this practice is not about pleasing other people for the sake of pleasing them. Because when I hear people pleasing, it sounds as if, again, kind of in this Western way of well, I don't care about myself as long as I please other people. No. Love yourself and care about yourself first. That's actually was what my early example today started with when I first went to the temple, which was I didn't love or care about myself. And in the practices that I was given to do, it created opportunity for me to love and care others. And as I loved and cared for others and took care of others, you know how that made me feel? You've taken care of somebody in your life, right? How does it make you feel when you take care of somebody? Good. And when you feel good, then how do you feel about yourself? Gooder. Right? So this idea of selfless practice is not saying that you don't exist. It's all done because what you end up receiving is actually the greatest gift. The Buddha taught the greatest thing you can give is the Dharma. It's not like a Dharma talk or the teachings of the Buddha. It's not lecturing somebody on the Four Noble Truths or anything. The Dharma of loving kindness, compassion, joy, generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, mindfulness, wisdom, all these kind of key buzzwords that you read about and hear about at every Buddhist thing you go to, when you give that to people and yourself, it makes you feel good. But yeah, don't be a people pleaser. Pretty sure the Buddha said that directly. I quote. Is that? Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. This is really, again, I don't have time to get into all this right now as we're getting close to wrapping up here, but personally, if this is something that's hitting you, it's a great opportunity for you to figure out, how can I love myself more? Because if you love yourself more, then the feeling of doing things that provide pleasing and safety and comfort for others, there's no resentment towards it. If you spend your life trying to be a people pleaser, then you resent people. If you love yourself, then you can spend your entire life being a people pleaser without any resentment whatsoever, because it brings you joy. And you hopefully can someday say, I love pleasing people, because it's a beautiful thing to do. But you can't get there if you don't love yourself first. Yeah? What else? We'll do one more before we wrap up here. Yeah.
Can you speak to, like, sometimes taking care of oneself, or just even living one's life, especially in such a complicated world, means doing harm somewhere down the line?
Yeah.
Just clothing yourself means that someone suffered.
Yes.
Because they were working in terrible conditions, or, so that there's always seems to be this, like in every decision one makes about doing no harm, there always seems to be like this opposition. Okay, if I'm doing this and this is good for me, someone suffered for this. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I talk about early on when I said that early on with this practice, it makes things more difficult because you begin to become more aware of how much suffering is actually existing in this world, and how our actions, large and small, can contribute to that. And, it's, to your point, it's very difficult to move throughout our day and physically exist without knowing, or without, you could do it and not know it, without the reality that things that we are consuming and participating in and observing are filled with so much suffering. So I think, and I'll kind of close with this thought, to find a balance in a middle path, I think, is healthy, because the reality is you're going to continue to do things that cause harm, or are a part of this cycle of harm, I should say. As you said, consuming things, right? Maybe the act of consuming it didn't cause harm, but there was suffering that occurred, as you said, the piece of clothing. There was suffering that occurred for you to consume that. So early on, the practice is the awareness of all that. Is to recognize, wow, what am I consuming? Where am I going? What am I doing? What am I looking at? What am I saying? And understanding the karma, the law of cause and effect, the causal relationship of all phenomena, as I always say, which is, where is harm on this cycle of all my thoughts and words and actions? And what can I do, this is why I bring up the middle path, to minimize that? Because to think that we're going to live in this world where we cause so much harm, like just blatant harm, and then try to minimize and decrease the harm we're causing, it can be overwhelming, which is what I actually hear in your question. It's overwhelming, almost as if, you have to cease to exist. And I just don't think that that's practical for lay people, meaning non-monks, non-nuns. We're not living in monasteries, right? But when you observe it, what can you do to minimize it? And that's, again, where I think the middle path is important to understand. Where's the balance? As I often talk about with all the clothes we have, if we have 50 shirts, nothing wrong with having 50 shirts, but we could probably survive on 25. And that means we have 25 shirts to give away, right? If we spend $30 on a meal, we probably survive spending $15 on a meal. And then we have $15 to buy a meal for somebody who's hungry. So finding that balance with, I think the heart of your question is important. Knowing that, we can't, it's not realistic to think that you're just going to liberate yourself from every cycle of suffering that occurs globally. But you can most of us could drastically reduce it. And then, once we get to that point, then we say, okay, now how can I continue to reduce it? So, not easy. But again, if you figure out how, please let me know. It'd be good. All right, so we'll join palms as we close. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. All right, just a few quick announcements before you all head out. Thanks for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma Bum. We opened up this temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers. We're not looking for students, we're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. Every night we have different practices going on, different people leading from a different Buddhist tradition. Every Thursday, 4:30, we do, I still think, probably one of the best things around here. It's a food redistribution program. We prepare gourmet vegetarian meals, also known as peanut butter and jelly, and we feed people asleep on the street every night. So if you think your life sucks and you lack gratitude, try feeding people asleep on a sidewalk, and it tends to put things in perspective. And if that doesn't work, keep doing it until it does. First Saturday of the month, as I mentioned, it starts up here, finishes downstairs. We do a half day of silence, so it's 4 hours of silence. 25 minutes of silence is torture. I strongly recommend you try it for 4 hours. It's not 4 hours straight. It's about 20-minute sits that are broken up with a 5-minute kind of walking meditation or cleaning meditation, things like that. Otherwise, we're looking for Thursday at noon, and I think Friday now as well, potentially. Our Thursday at noon leader of silent meditation is abandoning us. So if anyone wants to lead the silent meditation Thursdays at noon, it's really difficult. You open up the door at about 11:59. You hit the bell to start the meditation. You sit silently for the hour, and you hit the bell to stop meditation. That happens actually 12 to 12:25, and then 12:30 to 12:55. So if you want to help lead silent meditations Thursdays or potentially Fridays, let me